Welcome back, folks. In this short video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea that Nietzsche presents in section 341 of The Gay Science, and how we might be able to use it as a kind of centering device for the rest of his little aphoristic sections. So, in this famous section of The Gay Science, Nietzsche presents a thought experiment, and the thought experiment goes like this. Imagine, he says, that you are visited in the middle of the night by this being. He calls the being a demon. It doesn't really matter that it's a demon in the contemporary sense. It's just this supernatural being that can do this kind of weird stuff. And it gives you some news. The news that it gives you is that your life, as you've experienced it, and as you will experience it, because you're not done with it yet, presumably, will happen again and again and again and again and again and again. And each time it happens, it will be exactly the same, including this moment where the creature shows up and gives you this news. So that means that what happened to you today will happen again in the future as today, and you'll experience it in the exact same way. All the same stuff, all the same decisions, all the same consequences. And the question that Nietzsche poses here is this. How would you respond to this news? Aside from being confused about what on earth this creature is doing at the end of your bed, would you say that the news is good news? Would you say it's bad news? Occasionally, people respond by saying it's neither of these, although that's a little bit like saying it's not good news, which I think is a good enough answer for Nietzsche. So, what do you think? Imagine the first answer, that it's bad news. So maybe you think this already, but if you don't, just hypothesize for a second. So somebody says that it's bad news. Now at this point in the class, surely you know the next question is this. Okay, fine. What's bad about it? So if you think this, or you can imagine a person that thinks it's bad, then think a little bit about what they would say is bad about it. Here's what students have said to me in the past. Generally, they say something like this. Either that it's going to be very, very boring to experience the same thing again. Importantly, that's not exactly what would happen. You won't experience things as if you've experienced them before, but still the general idea is that the same thing is happening, and maybe like objectively you think this is boring. Or alternatively, you think that there are some bad parts of your life, either bad things that have happened to you, certain kinds of tragedies, or maybe bad decisions that you made that you wish you hadn't made. So these are some different possible answers that I think people intuitively give to the question of what's bad about it. So these are clearly the responses that Nietzsche is trying to get from us. He seems to think that most people would think that the news is bad. And it seems like even Nietzsche thinks that almost no one's going to be able to say that it's good news. Although occasionally I do meet people who say it's good news. The problem for Nietzsche in this answer, this bad news answer, comes once we do a closer investigation of these kinds of explanations. That is, what does it mean to say that this is bad news because these bad things which have happened to you, or these bad decisions you've made, are going to happen again? So in particular, at least the way that Nietzsche thinks about this, all these things that people call bad decisions, or all these things that people call bad things that have happened to them in the past, importantly, the person who you are now, that is saying that you wish those things hadn't happened to you, is of course the person that results from those bad things. In a significant way, the bad things that have happened to you and the bad decisions that you've made, whatever it means to call them bad, they're formative for who you are. And so if those things hadn't happened and you had not made those decisions, that means that the person you are now, who is currently saying that you wish those things hadn't happened, that person that you are now, that person would not exist. So, at least as Nietzsche understands it, saying that the repetition of your life is bad news more or less amounts to saying that your existence is bad news. He seems to think that wishing things had been otherwise, like seriously wishing, not as sort of a bit of fancy. But seriously, wishing that your past had been different is a little bit like wishing that you didn't exist, that you wish you were someone else. And there's something sort of nonsensical about that on the one hand, but also Nietzsche thinks there's something sort of tragic about this, that you wish that you didn't exist. Well, what's the alternative? So imagine this other possibility, this person who would say to the creature, this is great news, this is the best news that I've ever heard, you are a god, etc. What would that require? Well, I think this is one place where the rest of the sections that you read for today are particularly educative. Look at the kinds of things that Nietzsche says elsewhere, the kinds of things that he advocates for, the things that he says he loves and affirms. In particular, it seems like what it would require is that you would accept who you are and that you would accept your life in its totality. Not in a blind way, not in a way that suggests it is what it is or something like that. Nietzsche says, no, what it's going to require is an incalculable amount of love, in particular self-love, and a lot of joy. Joy about existence, joy about who you are, an appreciation of how all of your strengths and weaknesses form a styled tapestry that deserves to exist and is beautiful. And so the sections that we read before the heaviest weight, in a way, are an attempt to show us, at least possibly, what might be required for a person to affirm the eternal return. It would require a person who has looked into themselves, made sense of themselves, learned to love and reshape themselves into a being that they would affirm. Not just once, which is like the minimum of just being alive, Nietzsche thinks, but you would affirm it over and over and over again. At the end of section 341, Nietzsche seems to raise this question: what would it be like to be such a person? It seems like it might be sort of unimaginable. Maybe you think that this would be impossible. But Nietzsche seems to say, this is the challenge that we're presented with in the meantime. Take care.